When David Goggins opened his eyes that Tuesday morning at exactly 6:47 a.m., he had no idea that the words about to leave Dr. Patricia Reynolds' mouth would spark the most intense 6-week battle of his life, a battle that would redefine everything both of them understood about human limitations. "You'll never run again," she said, her voice cutting through the sterile hospital air like a blade forged in 15 years of delivering career-ending diagnoses. The fluorescent lights hummed above like angry wasps trapped in glass cages. The antiseptic smell that permeated every surface seemed to burn the very air they breathed. David's body looked like it had been torn apart by invisible hands and stitched back together by amateurs working in the dark, but his stare, that 1,000-yard stare that had carried him through Hell Week and beyond, remained absolutely unbreakable. Dr. Patricia Reynolds stood at the foot of his bed like a judge delivering a death sentence, holding X-rays that resembled a roadmap to nowhere. Her 15 years of crushing athletes' dreams had made her an expert at delivering impossible truths with the kind of clinical precision that left no room for false hope. "Your Achilles tendon is 60% destroyed. Your knee cartilage is gone. The damage is extensive and irreversible. Mr. Goggins, your running career is over." But what Dr. Reynolds didn't realize was that she was speaking to a man who had already stared death in the face twice and walked away victorious. "Doc, you got the wrong guy," David said, his voice cutting through the sterile air like broken glass that had been sharpened by years of refusing to accept defeat. Something in his tone, a combination of absolute certainty and quiet menace, made her take an involuntary step back. After 15 years of delivering career-ending diagnoses to elite athletes, Olympic hopefuls, and professional competitors, she thought she'd seen every type of denial that the human mind could conjure. The anger, the bargaining, the desperate pleading for second opinions. But this felt fundamentally different. This felt dangerous. "There's no mistake," she replied, clipping the X-ray to the light board. "Physics doesn't negotiate with willpower. Your body has reached its absolute limit." David Goggins had heard that word before. Limit. Navy SEAL instructors had screamed it at him during Hell Week, when hypothermia was literally shutting down his organs and his body temperature had dropped to levels that should have killed him. Race officials had whispered it when his kidneys failed at mile 180 of a 200-mile ultramarathon, and blood was appearing in his urine. His own father had tried to beat it into him with bloody fists, during a childhood that would have shattered most men before they reached adulthood. Each time, without exception, he had taken that word and spit it back in their faces with compound interest. "Lady, my body doesn't know how to quit," he said, struggling to sit up despite muscles screaming in protest, despite sutures pulling at flesh that hadn't even begun to properly heal. "My mind wrote the rules for this body a long time ago, and quitting ain't in the manual." Dr. Reynolds found herself experiencing something she hadn't felt in years: doubt about her own medical certainty. She had delivered this speech to Olympic champions and world record holders. They had all crumbled eventually. "If you push this injury, you'll end up in a wheelchair. Permanently," she warned. "Then let's find out," David replied with a calmness that filled the room with electricity. The silence that followed stretched between them like a loaded gun with the safety off. Heart monitors beat their rhythmic reminders of mortality in the background. Footsteps echoed in distant corridors like ghosts walking the halls. Somewhere down the hallway, a patient was calling for a nurse in a voice cracked with pain and desperation. The normal sounds of a hospital continuing its daily rhythm of healing and heartbreak, life and death, hope and surrender. But David Goggins wasn't looking at her like a broken athlete seeking comfort or false hope or some miraculous cure that existed only in movies. He was studying her like a predator sizing up prey, calculating angles and weaknesses she couldn't even see, measuring distances and possibilities with the kind of tactical awareness that had kept him alive in Iraq and Afghanistan. 6 weeks, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Your rules. Your timeline. Your protocol." What happened after she said yes would change both of their lives forever. "And if you fail?" she heard herself ask. David's smile was sharp enough to cut titanium. "Doc, I don't speak that language." Dr. Reynolds looked at the X-rays one more time. Black and white evidence of human limitation. Then she looked at David Goggins, a man who seemed to exist in full color in a world of medical absolutes. 6 weeks, she found herself saying. But any deviation from my protocol, and you're confined to this bed. The recovery that followed would rewrite everything both of them thought they knew about the word impossible. The first week that followed would become the foundation where legends are forged, and what no one in that hospital could have predicted was how quickly David Goggins would transform a sterile recovery room into his own personal laboratory for testing the boundaries between possible and impossible. Day 3 post-surgery found David staring at a standard-issue hospital walker like it was an enemy combatant that had personally insulted his mother. The aluminum frame gleamed under fluorescent lights, a monument to limitation and dependency that represented everything David Goggins had spent his entire life refusing to accept. We start with basic mobility, Dr. Reynolds explained. 10 steps today. 15 tomorrow. We build slowly. David's hands gripped the walker's frame with the same intensity he'd once gripped monkey bars during BUD/S training, hands that had pulled him through Hell Week when every rational thought in his brain was screaming at him to quit, through Badwater when the desert heat was literally cooking him from the inside out, through every impossible challenge that life had thrown at his feet like gauntlets waiting to be picked up. But what Dr. Reynolds didn't understand, what she couldn't possibly comprehend from her world of conservative medical timelines and defensive treatment protocols, was that David Goggins had never built anything slowly in his entire life. Slow was surrender. Slow was accepting that average was acceptable. 10 steps, he repeated. David took his first step. By step 5, sweat beaded on his forehead. By step 8, his legs screamed. By step 10, Dr. Reynolds nodded with satisfaction. That's when David kept walking. Mr. Goggins, stop. That's enough. Step 15. 20. Each movement was agony, but David had made friends with agony long ago. I said stop. Step 25. 30. She was watching a man literally willing his broken body to obey through pure mental force. David finally stopped at step 50. Not because his body gave out, but because he chose to. Tomorrow we do 100, he said, handing her the walker. But what happened during that first week's nights would test everything David thought he knew about his own limits, everything he'd built his identity around, every assumption he'd made about the relationship between mind and matter. At exactly 2:47 a.m. on day 4, David woke to pain that felt like liquid fire had been injected directly into his nervous system. The surgery site was throbbing with each heartbeat like some kind of organic time bomb. His Achilles felt like it was being torn apart by invisible hands that belonged to every doubt he'd ever refused to entertain. Every breath sent shockwaves through his entire body that reminded him that he was, despite all evidence to the contrary, still human. For the first time in decades, since he was that fat kid getting beaten by his father, since he was that weak recruit getting screamed at by drill instructors, David Goggins wondered if he had finally found the mountain he couldn't climb. The opponent he couldn't defeat. The limitation that would define him instead of being defined by him. He lay in darkness, listening to the hospital's nighttime symphony. This was different from every other challenge. SEAL training had an end date. Ultramarathons eventually finished. This felt infinite. That's when Dr. Reynolds appeared in his doorway. Can't sleep either? She asked. Pain management is part of recovery, she said. There's no shame in medication. Not taking pills. Why? Because pills don't teach you anything, David said. Pain is information. It tells you where you are, where you need to go. What is it telling you right now? David was quiet for a long moment. That this might be the one that breaks me. And how does that make you feel? Curious. I've never been broken before. Not really. Here's where everything shifted in a way that would define the next 5 weeks. I was broken once, Dr. Reynolds heard herself say. Boston Marathon, 2008. I was running a 2:47 pace. Mile 18, something popped in my knee. Kept running. Collapsed at mile 22. What happened? Torn ACL. Career over. Took me 2 years to accept it. Another 3 to figure out who I was if I wasn't a runner. That's why you became a doctor. That's why I became the doctor who tells people their dreams are over. The conversation lasted until sunrise, and both understood this was no longer just about rehabilitation. The second week would mark the beginning of a revolution in everything both of them understood about recovery, about limitation, about what the human body could endure when the human mind refused to accept defeat as a viable option. Nobody could have predicted what would happen when Dr. Reynolds walked into the hospital on day 8 to find David Goggins doing push-ups beside his bed. Not modified push-ups designed for recovering patients. Not assisted push-ups with physical therapy equipment. Full, military-grade push-ups with his injured leg elevated on the bed frame and his face twisted in concentration that bordered on the kind of meditation that monks spent lifetimes trying to achieve. "What the hell are you doing?" "Physical therapy," David said simply. "That's not physical therapy. That's self-destruction. Same thing, different angle." During physical therapy, David positioned himself on the table and began pushing his leg through movements that made other patients wince. "Slower," Dr. Reynolds instructed. "We're not trying to set records." "Why not?" Every person in the room stopped to listen. "Because recovery takes time. Everything takes time. Question is, how much time are you willing to spend being less than what you could be?" David wasn't just talking to Dr. Reynolds anymore. He was talking to everyone who had been told to accept their limitations. "Some limitations are real," she said. "And some limitations are just opinions. Question is, which ones are you going to believe?" That's when the elderly man with the walker tried taking a step without it. The stroke patient attempted a word she'd been avoiding. The football player loaded more weight than his protocol recommended. "Wait until you see what David challenged her to do next." "Dr. Reynolds," David said. "Your turn." "My turn for what?" "To stop being afraid." "I'm not afraid of anything." "You're afraid of hope. You're afraid that if you believe recovery is possible, you'll get disappointed again. Just like Boston." Here's what happened next that shocked everyone in the room. She walked to the dusty treadmill in the corner, the one no one in rehabilitation was supposed to use. She stepped on it, set it to 6.0 miles per hour, and started running. Her dress shoes slapped the belt. Her coat flapped like wings. Her hair came loose and flew. She ran for 30 seconds. A minute. 2 minutes. When she hit the stop button, something in her eyes had changed. "That," David said, "is what hope looks like." By the third week, they were witnessing what could only be described as the science of miracles. Dr. Reynolds arrived to find a note. "Doc gone for a walk. Back by lunch. DG." David's room was empty. 3 stories down, she saw a figure moving along the hospital's walking path. David Goggins was walking independently, which should have been impossible 15 days post-surgery. "Have you lost your mind?" she called, jogging to catch up. "Found it, actually," David replied. "It was hiding under medical opinions." His gait was calculated, sweat beaded his forehead, but he was walking like his leg hadn't been reconstructed 2 weeks earlier. "Your sutures could tear. You could set recovery back by months. Or I could discover that your timeline was just a guess based on average people doing average things." Other patients watched from windows. Nurses observed from corridors. Doctors stopped their rounds. "This isn't about proving anything to them. This is about proving something to you. To me? That maybe you've been playing it safe for so long that you forgot what aggressive recovery looks like. What if you're wrong?" David stopped and faced her completely. "Doc, what if I'm right? What if the difference between recovery and transformation is just the willingness to find out what's actually possible?" That evening, Dr. Reynolds researched recovery protocols from other countries. What she found challenged everything she thought she knew. Athletes in Germany returning 40% faster. Military programs achieving impossible recoveries. Cases of patients who refused limitations and somehow transcended them. You won't believe what she proposed to David on day 19. "I want to try something different," she announced. "Different how?" "Aggressive rehabilitation. We throw out the standard timeline and see how fast your body can actually heal when we stop telling it to go slow. David smiled with genuine joy rather than warrior determination. Doc, you just said the magic words. The 4th week would witness a protocol revolution. The new program looked nothing like anything she had prescribed before. 6 hours of therapy daily instead of 2. Strength training that progressively loaded his healing tendon. Cardiovascular work that pushed his heart rate into elite zones. This is either revolutionary or insane, she told him. Best things usually are, David replied. David's progress was exponential. Movements that should have taken months were happening in days. Strength benchmarks marking 6-month milestones were being hit in week 4. I need to understand how this is happening, she said during an evening session. Most people heal slow because they think slow. They accept limitations because accepting limitations feels safe. But there have to be physical constraints. Tissue healing rates. Sure. But what if those timelines are based on people healing while expecting to heal slow? While being told every day to be careful, take it easy? You're suggesting the mind directly influences physical healing rates. I'm not suggesting it. I'm proving it. Here's what Dr. Reynolds discovered next that would change everything about her own limitations. On day 27, David left another note. Doc, your turn. Meet me at the track. DG. She found him at the outdoor track, doing warm-up exercises that looked like dance. We're finding out if you can practice what you've been learning to preach. The track, a quarter-mile loop she hadn't run on since her injury 15 years earlier. I can't run anymore. You know that. I know that's what you've been telling yourself. I also know you've been doing treadmill work. It was true. Her knee hadn't hurt. It felt stronger than in years. Patricia, David said, using her first name for the first time. You're not broken anymore unless you choose to be. 1 lap, she heard herself say. Watch what happened when Dr. Patricia Reynolds took her position at the starting line of a race she'd been avoiding for 15 years. As she found her rhythm, she realized David had been right. Limitations were just opinions, and she was tired of living according to other people's opinions about what she could do. She completed the lap in 2:15 faster than she had moved in 15 years. How do you feel? David asked. Like I remembered something I thought I'd lost. What's that? That I'm not just a doctor who used to run. I'm a runner who happens to practice medicine. The 5th week would forge a partnership that changed everything. David was running 3 miles daily on a completely healed Achilles. More than healed, stronger than before. I need to ask you something, she told David during their morning run on day 30. Do you think I've been hurting my patients by keeping their expectations low? I think you've been protecting them from disappointment. But protection from disappointment is also protection from possibility. So what do? We prove aggressive recovery works. We document everything. We create a protocol other doctors can use. You realize what you're suggesting? We'd be challenging fundamental assumptions about rehabilitation medicine. Good. Assumptions need challenging. Dr. Reynolds made a decision that would define her career. She proposed a formal study documenting accelerated recovery protocols. Final test, she announced on day 33. I want you to run a 10K race. Public race. Against other runners who haven't spent a month rehabbing major surgery. You want me to race? I want us to race. Together. The San Diego Bay 10K became legendary in running circles. Dr. Reynolds and David lined up alongside 847 other runners. She wore racing flats for the first time in 15 years. He was 35 days removed from career-ending surgery. For the first mile, they ran conservatively. Mile 2, they picked up pace. Mile 3, Dr. Reynolds realized she wasn't thinking about her knee. Mile 4, David said, You ready to see what we've really accomplished? Mile 5, they began passing runners who never stopped training. Mile 6 became a celebration of everything they'd discovered about the relationship between mind and body, limitation and possibility. They crossed the finish line together in 43:17. Here's what nobody could have predicted about what happened afterward. Other runners asked questions. How had a 47-year-old recovered from major surgery so quickly? How had a doctor who hadn't raced in 15 years run sub 44 minutes? We stopped accepting limitations based on averages, Dr. Reynolds explained. Recovery is as much mental as physical. We proved that impossible is just an opinion, David added. And opinions can be changed. Videos of their post-race interview were shared across social media. By Monday, Dr. Reynolds had 17 interview requests. By Tuesday, David had speaking invitations nationwide. The final week marked the completion of a revolution. David's final evaluation showed complete healing with strength exceeding pre-injury baselines. Dr. Reynolds had transformed from an ex-runner practicing defensive medicine to a pioneer of aggressive rehabilitation. So what now? David asked on day 42. Now we teach other people what we learned. The Goggins-Reynolds protocol would be implemented nationwide. Patients told their recoveries would take months began healing in weeks. Athletes facing career-ending surgeries returned to competition faster than anyone thought possible. But the most important transformation was in understanding that limitations are often self-imposed, that recovery is as much about mindset as medicine, and that the impossible becomes possible when someone refuses to accept conventional wisdom. Dr. Reynolds revolutionized rehabilitation medicine. David continued pushing boundaries with new understanding that even the most determined individual could be strengthened by finding the right partner. Together, they proved that the greatest limitations aren't physical, they're mental. And mental limitations exist only as long as we choose to believe in them. The hospital room where their journey began now displays a plaque. Recovery isn't about returning to where you were. It's about discovering where you can go. Below it, impossible is just an opinion that hasn't been tested yet. Wait until you hear what happened 6 months later. 6 months after being told he would never run again, David Goggins completed the Boston Marathon in 2 hours 47 minutes and 33 seconds, the exact time Dr. Reynolds had been running when her dreams were shattered 15 years earlier. She ran beside him every step of the way. When they crossed the finish line together, Dr. Reynolds realized that healing others had finally allowed her to heal herself. David discovered that sometimes the greatest victories aren't achieved alone, but in partnership with someone who understands that the only real limitations are the ones we accept. Two people who learned that impossible was just another word for untested had proven that recovery, like all meaningful challenges, is a choice between settling for average and discovering what extraordinary looks like. That choice, they learned, was always available to anyone willing to make it. The question wasn't whether it was possible. The question was whether you were ready to find out. What's your impossible that's waiting to be tested? What limitation have you accepted that might just be an opinion in disguise? Share your answer in the comments below. Sometimes the first step toward the impossible is simply admitting that you're ready to try.